End it quickly." The Apache girl, injured and pinned in the canyon, spoke calmly. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the jagged peaks of the canyon, painting the rocks with streaks of orange and gold. The desert air was dry and still, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dust. A young Apache girl moved carefully among the rocky terrain, her small frame almost invisible against the canyon walls. Her dark hair was braided neatly, swinging lightly with every careful step, and her eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the surroundings for any sign of danger. She was only 16, yet she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had grown up in these lands, learning from her elders how to read the land, how to listen to its stories, and how to survive when others could not. She was not alone. A small group of Apache scouts, mostly young men and a few women, were with her. They moved in silence, their feet barely making a sound against the hard earth. The canyon was narrow with towering cliffs on either side that seemed to close in as the sun sank lower. Every shadow, every rustle of rock made them tense. They were aware that soldiers from a nearby fort could be hunting them, that every step carried the risk of discovery. The girl had been part of the group for months, learning to scout, to hide, and to move like the wind, swift, silent, and unseen. Today, however, something felt different. The wind whispered a warning she could not ignore. She glanced over her shoulder at the others, who returned her look with quiet determination. They were all experienced, yet even experience could not erase the fear that lived in their stomachs. The canyon had a way of making small things feel huge, making the ordinary sound of shifting stones or a distant bird call seem like a signal of danger. The girl adjusted the strap of her pack, shifting her weight carefully as she stepped over a fallen branch, her heart beating a little faster than usual. She was always careful, always alert, but now there was a deeper tension, an unspoken knowledge that something could happen at any moment. And then it did. A sudden crack rang out through the canyon, sharp and violent. The girl froze, her body instinctively pressing close to the cliff wall. Rocks tumbled down from above, dust and pebbles spraying into the air. She heard the startled cries of her companions, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. The soldiers had been waiting, hiding among the rocks, and now they were attacking. Chaos erupted. The groups scattered in different directions, seeking cover wherever they could. The girl ran, twisting around boulders and leaping over narrow gaps. But one misstep brought her tragedy. A large rock, dislodged by the gunfire, or perhaps by her own foot, came crashing down. She felt the heavy weight strike her leg, and a sharp pain shot through her body. She fell to the ground with a harsh thud, the world around her spinning for a moment. Her pack tumbled beside her, scattering the few possessions she carried. Some food, a small knife, and a bit of cloth for bandages. Panic tried to rise in her chest, but she forced it down. She gritted her teeth against the pain, breathing shallowly and trying to move. The rock had pinned her leg firmly against the canyon floor. No matter how she strained, she could not lift it, could not crawl free. She tried to call out to her companions to warn them, but her voice caught in her throat. All she could hear was the echo of gunfire bouncing off the canyon walls, the clatter of rocks, and the quickened breathing of her own body as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. The girl pressed her hands against the boulder, testing its edges, feeling the weight that kept her trapped. She knew instinctively that this was not something she could escape from easily. The soldiers were closing in, their shouts and commands now echoing through the canyon. She could see their shadows moving along the rocks above, and for the first time, the fear that had been kept at bay began to creep in. But even as fear tried to grip her, she forced herself to stay calm. She remembered what her grandmother had told her. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She took a slow, steadying breath and surveyed her surroundings. The canyon floor was uneven, covered in loose stones and dry brush. There were small crevices in the cliffs, narrow enough to offer some protection if she could reach them, but the boulder made movement nearly impossible. She shifted slightly, testing her options, but each movement sent fresh waves of pain through her leg. She gritted her teeth and focused on what she could do. She was alone, pinned, and hurt, but she was not without hope. There was always a way, even if it was small, even if it was dangerous. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to remember the lessons of the land. The sounds, the smells, the small signs that told of hidden paths or the approach of others. The birds had fallen silent, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She realized that the soldiers were aware of her, that they would find her soon if they had not already. She felt a shiver run down her spine, not just from the cold of the canyon shadows, but from the weight of what was coming. She had to make a choice. Panic would not save her. Hesitation could cost her everything. The girl thought of her family, of the stories her grandmother had told her by the fire. She thought of the desert at sunrise, the way the light touched the rocks and made them glow as if alive. She thought of the courage she had seen in her people, in her elders, in her companions who had faced impossible odds with quiet determination. That courage was now inside her, and she could call on it. She took a deep breath and allowed herself to look around the boulder one more time. The soldiers were moving cautiously, speaking in low, sharp voices, their weapons ready. She could not outrun them, could not fight them off alone. Her mind raced, weighing every possibility. She knew that capture was dangerous, that she could not trust them to treat her well, and she knew that the land she loved, the canyon she had learned to move through with care, could also be her refuge if she made the right choices. With deliberate movements, she shifted slightly to test the edges of the boulder again. It did not budge, but she felt the rough texture of the rock against her hands, the dry earth beneath her fingers. She pressed her lips together and focused on her breathing, counting each inhale and exhale. Calmness became her weapon, more important now than speed or strength. She could not move, but she could think. She could observe. She could plan. The girl's ears picked up every sound, the snapping of a twig, the scrape of a boot against stone, the whisper of wind through narrow cracks in the canyon walls. She realized that the soldiers were not expecting a fight, not expecting resistance. They thought her trapped and helpless. And in some ways she was, but that did not mean she was defeated. There was still a choice she could make, a way she could maintain her dignity, even in the face of danger. Pain shot through her leg again, sharp and relentless, but she did not cry out. She whispered quietly to herself, not words meant for anyone else, grounding herself in the present moment. She felt the canyon around her, the roughness of the boulder, the dryness of the earth beneath her palms. She felt the sun's warmth fading from the rocks and the chill creeping into the shadows. She felt alive, even in this moment of fear. She realized something important. Fear could not control her. Panic could not define her. She had a choice in how she faced what was coming, even if she could not change the outcome. Her heart slowed slightly as she accepted this truth. The soldiers were near now, their voices louder, but she did not move. She would face this moment with the courage she had inherited from generations before her. And in that moment, as the shadows of the canyon grew longer and the first stars began to peek above the cliffs, the young Apache girl understood that survival was not just about the body, but about the spirit. She would not give up her courage. Even if everything else seemed lost, Dahi girl lay pinned beneath the boulder, her leg trapped under its heavy weight. Pain radiated through her body, sharp and relentless, but she refused to scream. She had learned long ago that sound could give away her position, and even now, that lesson mattered more than her own suffering. The canyon was quiet around her, though the echoes of distant footsteps and voices hinted at the soldiers moving closer. Every sound bounced off the towering cliffs, making her heart race, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each breath, grounding herself in the present. Her hands shook slightly as she brushed the dust and small pebbles from her face and arms. She pressed her cheek to the hard earth, feeling the rough texture against her skin. She could see the sun dipping lower behind the cliffs, its light fading into streaks of orange and purple. The shadows grew long, wrapping the canyon in darkness that made everything seem more dangerous. Yet, even in the fear, she felt a strange calm. It was a calm born from knowing she had survived worse, that she had faced challenges before and learned to rely on herself. She tried to move her leg again, testing the boulder's weight. It was impossible. The rock would not budge. Panic rose for a moment, sharp and frightening, but she swallowed it down. Tears threatened, but she pressed her lips together and blinked them back. She had no time for crying. She had to think. She had to act. There was always a choice, even in the most hopeless situations. The girl remembered the lessons her grandmother had taught her about the land. Every stone, every tree, every ridge had a story. The canyon could be a prison, yes, but it could also be a protector if she read it carefully. She listened closely to the wind, to the small noises that told her where the soldiers were moving. A twig snapped somewhere far above her, followed by a quiet murmur of voices. She stiffened, holding her breath, and realized they were scanning the canyon floor carefully. They had not yet found her, but it was only a matter of time. She thought of her family. She remembered the nights spent around the fire, the warmth of her mother's hands as they braided her hair, the quiet stories of courage told by her grandmother. Those memories gave her strength. She pressed her hand to her chest and felt the steady beat of her heart. Fear was natural, she told herself, but it did not have to control her. She could face what was coming with courage, dignity, and calmness. Hours seemed to pass, though the sun continued its slow descent, and the shadows stretched longer. The girl's leg throbbed, the pain increasing with every movement she tried. She whispered quietly to herself, reminding herself of her skills. She thought about the ways she had learned to move through the desert, how to hide, how to listen, how to survive. She couldn't escape physically, but she could still think, still plan, still observe. And thinking could be just as powerful as moving. She noticed the details around her, small things that might help. A narrow crevice near the base of the cliff could give her a tiny shelter if she could reach it. A loose stone nearby could serve as a tool to shift the boulder, even slightly. She studied the soldiers' movements as they drew closer, careful to remain silent and still. Every moment required patience. One wrong move could give away her location, but one clever choice could make all the difference. Pain made her flinch, but it also sharpened her senses. She became aware of the rhythm of her breathing, the faint sound of her own heartbeat, the temperature of the canyon air as it cooled with the evening. She felt the sweat drying on her skin, the dust sticking to her arms and face, the ache in her muscles from being pinned so long. And yet, she felt a strange clarity. Pain, fear, and danger all pressed against her, but her mind remained sharp. She had learned that survival required both body and spirit working together. The girl thought about the soldiers. They were strong-armed and dangerous, but they underestimated her. They assumed that being trapped meant she was helpless. That assumption gave her a sense of power, small though it was. She could not move, but she could think, and thinking had its own kind of strength. She considered her options carefully. There was no easy way out, no simple escape, but there was always a choice about how she would face her situation, how she would hold her courage and dignity even in the face of fear. The sky darkened further, and the first stars began to twinkle high above the canyon walls. The girl's mind wandered for a moment to the stars themselves, distant and constant, unafraid of anything below them. She imagined herself among them, untouchable and calm, even if only in her mind. That imagination gave her a small measure of peace. She pressed her hands into the dirt beside her, grounding herself in the present. She was alive. She was aware, and she would face what was coming with courage. A bird called somewhere above the canyon, a sharp, quick note that made her start slightly, but she forced herself to focus again, listening to the sounds of the soldiers moving cautiously through the rocks. They were methodical, searching, but they were not in a hurry. That was both an advantage and a risk. They could discover her at any moment, but their caution gave her time to prepare herself mentally. She could not fight them physically, but she could meet them with calmness and clarity, even in this dangerous moment. She remembered the lessons about courage she had learned from her elders. Courage was not always about fighting. It was about choosing how to face fear. She pressed her lips together and drew a deep, slow breath. The pain in her leg was sharp, unrelenting, but she did not let it control her. Her hands brushed against the boulder again, testing its edges, feeling the rough surface beneath her fingers. She could not move it, but she could accept it. Acceptance gave her a strange freedom, a way to focus on what she could do rather than what she could not. Time passed slowly. The girl felt exhaustion creeping into her body, but she kept her mind active. She thought about the canyon, the stories it held, the lessons it had taught her. She thought about the sun setting, the shadows deepening, the cool air settling in the rocks. Every detail became important, every sound and movement a clue. The soldiers were searching, but they had not yet found her. She allowed herself a quiet sense of hope, a fragile but real belief that she could meet whatever came next with courage. Her eyes scanned the canyon walls, noting the small cracks, the tiny ledges, the places where the light still lingered. She considered each one, imagining how she might use it, even if only to protect her spirit. She thought about the way her people had faced danger before, how they had used patience, intelligence, and courage to survive. That knowledge strengthened her resolve. She would not panic. She would not cry. She would face this moment with calmness, even if her body could not move. As darkness fell fully over the canyon, the girl realized that her strength lay not in escape, but in her mind and spirit. She could not control the soldiers or the boulder, but she could control her thoughts, her breath, and her courage. She could remain calm, observe, and choose how to meet what was coming. And in that quiet, painful, tense moment, she made a silent promise to herself. She would face whatever happened with dignity and bravery. Even as the pain throbbed in her leg and the shadows deepened around her, the girl felt a strange clarity. She was alone, pinned and injured, but she was not defeated. Fear was there, yes, but it would not control her.
She had a choice. She had courage.
And she would use it. The canyon had grown dark, the sun long gone behind the jagged cliffs, leaving shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly along the rocky walls. The girl remained pinned beneath the boulder, her leg trapped, her body aching, but her mind sharper than ever. Every sound around her seemed louder in the silence of the canyon. her own shallow breaths, the soft scrape of boots against stone, the faint rustle of loose rocks. She had learned to listen carefully, and now listening was her only weapon. She could hear the soldiers moving closer, their voices low but confident. They were searching methodically, stepping carefully among the rocks, shining lanterns and peering into every nook and cranny. To them, she must have seemed trapped and helpless. That assumption made her heart beat a little faster, but it also gave her a strange sense of power. They did not know that even trapped and injured, she was aware, thinking, planning. She adjusted herself slightly, careful not to aggravate the pain in her leg. Her body protested with sharp stabs of pain, but she pressed on. She tried to quiet her breathing, making it slow and even so the soldiers would not detect her. The boulder beneath which she was pinned pressed heavily against her leg, making every movement a challenge. But even as her muscles screamed, she found a strange clarity. Pain was sharp, yes, but it also made her mind alert, focusing on what was happening around her. Her eyes, trained to notice details, scanned the soldiers' movements. They were not rushing. They assumed they had time. That gave her a small advantage. She studied the way they moved, the way they held their weapons, the soft murmur of their conversation. Every detail mattered. Every pause, every step could be used. She noticed a small shadowed ledge nearby, a tiny hollow in the canyon wall that might have provided some protection if she could reach it. But moving now was impossible. Instead, she focused on preparing herself mentally for what was to come. Her thoughts drifted briefly to her family. She remembered the warmth of her mother's hands, the sound of her father's quiet laughter, and the stories her grandmother had told by the fire. Courage, her grandmother had said, was a choice, not an absence of fear. Those words became a shield around her heart. She could not move her leg, she could not escape, but she could control her mind, her spirit, her reaction. That control was power, even in this dire situation. A sudden crack echoed through the canyon. The soldiers had discovered something, a disturbed patch of dirt, a fallen branch, and they paused, moving carefully toward it. Her body tensed, every nerve alert. She pressed herself closer to the boulder, trying to make herself as small and silent as possible. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but she forced herself to remain calm. Panic, she reminded herself, would do nothing. Calm thinking, careful observation, and patience were her tools now. One of the soldiers stepped closer, lantern held high. The flickering light played across the rocks, illuminating the canyon walls in a dance of shadows. The girl could see his boots, the glint of metal on his belt, the way he moved with cautious confidence. He had no idea that just beneath the boulder lay a girl who was fully aware of him, who understood the danger and had already begun to prepare herself. Her chest tightened as the lantern swung closer, its light casting long beams across the rough stones. The soldier crouched, peering around the edge of a rock near the boulder. The girl held her breath, her mind racing through every possibility. She could not move, she could not fight, yet she refused to show fear. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to struggle, but she stayed perfectly still, her eyes locked on the approaching soldier. She felt the weight of her decision, knowing that the moment would demand the ultimate courage. Her mind drifted to the stories of her people, the bravery shown by Apache warriors and women alike. Many had faced impossible odds and survived, or had met death with dignity. That tradition, that history of courage, was her inheritance. She pressed her hand to the earth beneath her, grounding herself, letting the solidity of the canyon floor steady her. Even trapped, even in pain, she could meet this moment with strength. The soldier crouched lower, moving a little closer. His shadow fell over her, long and sharp in the dim lantern light. She could see the sharpness of his gaze, the way he scanned the rocks, unaware that she was so close beneath him. Her chest rose and fell slowly, her breathing controlled, even as her leg throbbed with pain. She had never felt more aware, more alive, more in tune with the world around her. Every detail, every movement mattered now. Then, as the soldier paused, she spoke. Her voice was quiet but clear, steady in the silence of the canyon. "End it quickly." The words startled him. They were unexpected, calm, and precise. For a moment, the soldier froze, unsure what he had heard. The girl's tone carried neither fear nor desperation. It carried acceptance, a quiet bravery that struck him in a way he did not understand. She had spoken with a calmness that seemed to fill the canyon, wrapping around the rocks and shadows. The soldier glanced around, confused. He did not know what to make of the voice, whether it came from a child, a woman, or an injured warrior. He stepped closer cautiously, his eyes searching the darkness, his weapon ready, but still he could not locate her. The girl remained pinned beneath the boulder, her eyes locked on him, her expression serene despite the pain. Her courage, calm, and resolve were more powerful than any weapon in that moment. Other soldiers approached, their voices low and sharp. They scanned the area, calling out to each other, trying to understand where the voice had come from. The girl remained still, her mind focused, her body pressed against the rough earth, every sense alert. She could not escape, but she could control how she met this moment. Her calmness, her clarity, and her courage became her shield. The soldiers' lanterns flickered over the boulder, revealing the edge of her pack and the scattered cloth and food around her. One soldier stepped closer, peering at the rock with suspicion. The girl remained motionless, letting the shadows hide her, letting her calm presence speak louder than fear or pain. She knew they would soon realize she was trapped beneath it, but she also knew that her words, her calmness, had already left a mark on them. She thought again of her family, her people, and the lessons of courage and dignity. She drew a slow, steadying breath, feeling the rise and fall of her chest. She focused on her thoughts, on controlling every part of herself that she could. Even if the soldiers discovered her, even if the outcome was uncertain, she would meet it with bravery. That was her choice, and it was hers alone. The soldiers circled the boulder carefully, their lanterns casting long beams of light. They muttered to each other, trying to understand the situation. The girl felt their hesitation, their uncertainty. Her calm voice had changed the balance. They expected panic or cries, but she had shown neither. That unexpected strength made them pause, and it gave her a small measure of control over the moment, even though her body remained pinned. Minutes passed slowly. The girl's leg throbbed, pain shooting up through her body with every heartbeat, but she focused on her breath, on the rhythm of her thoughts, and on the presence she maintained. She understood now, more clearly than ever, that courage was not the absence of pain, but the decision to act with strength despite it. She had chosen her path. She would face this moment with clarity, calmness, and dignity. The soldiers finally paused directly above the boulder. One of them muttered something under his breath, then slowly leaned over, looking down at the trapped rock. The girl met his gaze without fear, her dark eyes steady and unwavering. Her voice had been heard, her courage noticed, and now she waited, fully aware of the weight of the moment, the intensity of the encounter, and the choices that lay before her. Even pinned beneath the heavy rock, even injured and in pain, the girl was unbroken. Her spirit remained strong, her mind clear, and her courage absolute. The canyon was quiet again, The only sounds the faint whisper of wind and the careful movements of the soldiers. She had faced fear directly, and she had met it with strength. Her words, her calm, and her resolve had made an impact, one that would linger far beyond the shadows of that canyon. She understood now that bravery was not always measured by escape or survival, but by the ability to meet what came with calmness, clarity, and dignity. And in the dark, silent canyon, the girl pinned beneath the boulder embodied that truth fully, unshaken even in the face of uncertainty. The night in the canyon was quiet now, but it was not a peaceful quiet. The air was heavy with dust, and the faint smell of the earth, the scent of dry rock and sagebrush lingering in the shadows. The young Apache girl remained pinned beneath the boulder, her leg aching with every passing moment, but her mind still sharp. Even in the darkness she could feel the weight of what had just occurred. The soldiers had come close, had searched, and had heard her voice. She had spoken calmly, clearly, and even in the face of danger she had not wavered. That calmness had left its mark, a quiet recognition that courage could take many forms. Around her, the canyon held its own memory of the events. The rocks that had tumbled during the ambush now lay still. The loose earth settled after the soldiers' footsteps shook it. The wind whispered gently through narrow cracks, and the shadows of the cliffs stretched long across the canyon floor. The girl pressed her hand into the dust, feeling the solidity of the earth beneath her. Even pinned, even injured, she had survived the first and most dangerous part of the encounter. That alone gave her a sense of quiet pride, tempered by the ache in her leg and the reality of the situation. She could hear movement above her now, soft footsteps and low voices. Her companions must have returned. The small group that had been scattered during the ambush was now carefully making its way back, searching for her. Relief rose in her chest, but she forced herself to stay focused. Rescue was not immediate, and the soldiers were still nearby. One wrong move, one careless sound, could still bring danger. She shifted slightly, testing the boulder again. It did not move. Her leg throbbed, pain shooting up her body, but she managed to adjust, just enough to relieve a small part of the pressure. The girl's mind wandered briefly to the men and women who had fought beside her, the friends who had shared the long months of scouting and travel through the desert. Each had their own stories of bravery, each had faced fear in ways both large and small. Now, she thought, it was her turn to be remembered for her courage. She pressed her lips together, holding back the urge to cry from exhaustion or from pain. Tears would not change her situation. Calm thinking and careful planning might. Above her, one of her companions called softly. The sound of the voice was both comforting and jarring. Relief surged, and yet she knew she could not show too much excitement. She whispered back, just enough to let them know she was alive. Her words were quiet, careful, but they carried a strength that came from months of learning to communicate with small gestures, subtle signs, and whispered words. Even in the dark, even pinned beneath the heavy rock, she had found a way to connect with those who cared for her. The companions approached carefully, scanning the rocks for signs of soldiers. Their movements were deliberate, their eyes sharp, their hands ready. They had learned, like she had, that the canyon could be as dangerous as it was beautiful. Every shadow could hide a threat, every sound could signal an approaching enemy. They moved slowly, deliberately, until finally one of them knelt beside the boulder. Relief and concern mixed in their expression as they realized she was trapped but alive. "Are you hurt badly?" one whispered, his voice low and urgent. The girl nodded slightly, pressing her hand against the boulder as she tried to move it again. "It's heavy," she said softly. "I can't get out by myself." Her companion examined the situation carefully. The boulder was indeed massive, and moving it required more strength and planning than a single person could provide. They exchanged quiet instructions, and soon several companions worked together, carefully shifting smaller stones around the edges of the boulder to create leverage. The girl felt a mixture of gratitude and guilt, grateful for their help, but aware that she had been a danger to herself and them by being pinned. As they worked, the girl remained calm, following their instructions and lending what help she could with her hands. Pain surged through her leg with every movement, but she ignored it, focusing on breathing steadily and remaining composed. She understood now more than ever that courage was not only about facing fear, but also about patience, endurance, and trust in others. The boulder shifted slightly under their combined effort, then more, until finally, with a concerted push, it moved enough for her to slide her leg free. Freedom brought no immediate relief, only new challenges. Her leg was badly injured, swollen, bruised, and painful. Every step sent sharp waves of agony through her body. Her companions quickly supported her, guiding her toward a slightly safer part of the canyon floor. The air was cool now, and the stars above twinkled faintly through the gaps in the cliffs. The night sky was a reminder of the vastness of the world, of both danger and beauty, and the girl drew strength from it. They worked together to bandage her leg as best they could with cloth and herbs they carried for emergencies. Every movement was careful, deliberate, and quiet, mindful of the possibility that the soldiers might still be nearby. The girl gritted her teeth as pain surged again, but she focused on the care of her companions, on the calm rhythm of their voices, on the way they moved as a team to keep her safe. Even in the darkest night, surrounded by danger, there was the comfort of human connection, the reassurance that she was not alone. Her thoughts drifted to the soldiers who had come so close earlier. She remembered the way they had paused, startled by her calm voice. That memory brought a strange mixture of fear and pride. She had met them with dignity, without panic or desperation. Her calm had been noticed, and in some small way, it had reminded her that courage could speak louder than fear. Now, safe for the moment, she allowed herself to reflect on what had happened, to understand how her actions and her calmness had shaped the encounter. Time passed slowly. Her companions spoke in hushed tones, moving cautiously but with purpose. The girl rested, leaning against a rock and closing her eyes briefly. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, but she resisted sleep. She needed to remain aware, to stay alert, to continue to meet each moment with patience and strength. Even in rest, she held on to the lessons she had learned about courage, endurance, and the power of a calm mind. The night wore on, and the canyon gradually became quieter. The soldiers had retreated or perhaps moved on, leaving only the echo of their footsteps behind. The girl's companions remained close, offering comfort and support, helping her navigate the rough terrain. Every step was painful, but each step was a reminder that she was alive, that she had survived the worst of the immediate danger, and that courage had carried her through. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the canyon walls, the girl and her companions had reached a safer spot, slightly elevated, with more stable ground and a clearer view of the surrounding landscape. She sat quietly, her legs still throbbing, and looked at the horizon where the first rays of sunlight were spilling over the cliffs. The light touched the rocks with warmth, painting them in colors that seemed almost magical after the darkness of the night. For the first time in hours, she felt a deep sense of calm and relief. She thought about what had just occurred, about the soldiers, the boulder, the darkness, and the pain. She realized that courage had been more important than escape, that patience had been more valuable than speed. She had faced fear directly, and she had done so with dignity and clarity. Even pinned beneath the heavy rock, even injured and in pain, she had remained strong. That strength would carry her forward, she knew, in ways she could not yet fully understand. Her companions looked at her with quiet admiration. They understood, as she did, that bravery could take many forms, and that the courage to remain calm and steady in the face of fear was a form of power that few truly recognized. The girl met their eyes, sharing a silent understanding. They had all survived the night together, each contributing to the safety of the group, each witnessing the quiet strength that had guided her through the darkness. As the canyon filled with the soft light of morning, the girl took a slow, deliberate breath. The night had been long, painful, and frightening, but it had also been a lesson in courage, patience, and endurance. She knew the day ahead would bring new challenges. Her leg needed care, the group needed to continue their journey, and the memory of the soldiers would linger. But she also knew that she had faced the worst of fear with strength and calm. That knowledge was more valuable than anything else, a quiet victory that no one could take away. The girl leaned back against the rock, feeling the sun's warmth on her face, and allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She had survived, she had remained brave, and she had learned that courage was not always measured by the battles won, but by the way one met fear, pain, and uncertainty with clarity and dignity. In the quiet light of morning, pinned beneath a heavy boulder the night before, she had discovered a strength that would carry her forward, guiding her through the canyon and beyond. The girl and her companions had survived the night, but the journey through the canyon was far from over. The morning sun shone brightly over the cliffs, painting the rocks in shades of gold and red. The canyon, which had felt so threatening in the darkness, now appeared almost peaceful. Yet she knew that danger could return at any moment. Every shadow, every sound still demanded her attention. Her leg was badly injured, swollen and stiff, making each step painful, but she moved forward carefully, leaning on her companions for support. As they climbed higher along the rocky path, the girl thought about the night they had survived. She remembered the sharp weight of the boulder pressing against her leg, the echo of soldiers' footsteps, and the moment she had spoken with calmness in the darkness. She understood now more clearly than ever that courage was not just about physical strength or fighting ability. It was about the choices one made in the face of fear, about remaining calm, focused, and true to oneself, even when every circumstance demanded panic. Her companions walked beside her, guiding her carefully over uneven stones, pausing whenever her leg caused her pain. They did not rush, understanding that every movement had to be deliberate. The girl felt gratitude for them, not just for their physical support, but for their presence, their understanding, and their shared experience. In many ways, the journey through the canyon was more than a test of survival. It was a lesson in trust, loyalty, and the quiet strength found in working together. She thought again of her family and her people, of the lessons passed down through generations about bravery and wisdom. The night before had reminded her that survival was not only about avoiding danger, but also about the choices one made when danger was unavoidable. She had faced fear directly and had done so with clarity and calm, and that memory gave her a quiet sense of pride. Even in pain, even with the uncertainty of the world around her, she felt a strength that nothing could take away. The canyon gradually opened into a wider valley, the jagged cliffs giving way to rolling hills and scattered desert vegetation. The change in landscape brought a small measure of relief. The girl could rest her injured leg on more stable ground, and the group could see their path more clearly. Birds called from the distance, their songs bright and lively, as if celebrating the arrival of the morning sun. The girl smiled faintly, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the cool breeze on her arms. It was a reminder that even after darkness and danger, light and calm could return. As they continued, the girl began to notice small things about her surroundings that she had never truly appreciated before. The texture of the rocks under her hands, the way the sunlight shimmered on the canyon walls, the delicate movement of tiny plants in the wind. All of it became vivid and alive in her mind. She realized that moments of danger and fear could sharpen perception, heighten awareness, and create a deep connection with the world. Even in the midst of pain and uncertainty, life had beauty, and she was determined to see it. Her companions spoke quietly as they walked, sharing observations and encouragement. They moved as a team, each aware of the girl's injury, each ready to help when needed. She appreciated their care, but she also understood that their attention and concern were a reflection of their trust in her courage. She had remained calm in the darkness, brave in the face of danger, and now that strength had become a source of confidence for those around her. Hours passed as they navigated the canyon floor and climbed gentle slopes. The girl rested when necessary, leaning on her companions or sitting on rocks, allowing them to tend to her injured leg. She reflected on how small actions, quiet patience, and steady courage had carried her through the night. Survival was rarely about heroic gestures alone. It was often about composure, focus, and the determination to endure. She had learned that even a single calm choice in a moment of fear could make the difference between despair and hope. By midday, the group reached a small stream flowing through the valley. The sound of water rushing over stones brought a deep sense of relief. They paused, allowing the girl to rest more fully and tending to her injury with care. They cleaned the wound as best they could, applied fresh bandages, and gave her water to drink. The girl marveled at the way something as simple as water could feel like a blessing, a gift of life after a night filled with danger and pain. Every sip, every careful step, every warm ray of sun on her face reminded her that life continued, even after fear and hardship. As the girl rested by the stream, her mind wandered to the soldiers they had encountered. She remembered the moment she had spoken calmly, the way her voice had carried through the darkness, and the pause it had caused in those who thought her helpless. She realized that courage could influence others, even in small ways. Her calm had not only protected her, but it had also left an impression, a subtle acknowledgement of strength that went beyond the immediate moment. That understanding made her feel a quiet sense of accomplishment and dignity. The group remained near the stream until the afternoon, resting and preparing to continue. The girl's leg, though still injured, had improved slightly with rest, and she felt a renewed determination to continue the journey. Each step forward was painful, yes, but it was also an act of courage, a continuation of the choice she had made the night before, to meet fear with calmness and clarity. Every movement reminded her that courage was not a single moment, but a series of choices, each reinforcing the next. As they traveled, the girl thought about how this experience would remain with her. The night pinned beneath the boulder, the encounter with the soldiers, the pain and the calmness she had maintained, all of it would shape her understanding of herself and the world. She realized that stories of bravery were not always about dramatic acts of strength or violence. Sometimes they were about endurance, patience, and the quiet courage to remain composed in moments of extreme fear. Her story, she knew, would be one of those quiet but powerful examples. By evening, the group reached a small plateau overlooking the canyon below. The view was breathtaking. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. The girl sat quietly, her injured leg carefully supported by her companions. She watched as the colors shifted in the sky, the reds and oranges deepening into purples and blues. The beauty of the scene filled her with a sense of peace she had not felt during the night. It was a reminder that even after fear, danger, and pain, life could offer moments of profound calm and wonder. Her companions gathered around her, sharing stories of the night and the morning, their voices low and filled with respect. They spoke of her calmness, of the courage she had shown, and of the strength she had inspired in all of them. The girl listened quietly, feeling a deep sense of connection and pride. She realized that courage was not only personal, it could ripple outward, touching others and shaping the way they saw the world. Her calm, her strength, her choices had mattered beyond herself. As darkness fell over the plateau, the girl leaned back against a rock, looking at the stars emerging one by one in the clear desert sky. She thought of her family, of her people, of the lessons passed down through generations about courage, endurance, and dignity. She knew that her story would live on, whispered among her people, remembered as an example of calm strength in the face of danger. Her voice, once heard in the dark canyon, would be remembered as a symbol of courage and clarity. The girl closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet of the night and the cool desert air wash over her. She felt gratitude for her companions, for the canyon that had tested her, for the challenges that had revealed her strength. She understood that her life, like the canyon, was full of obstacles, dangers, and moments of fear, but also full of beauty, support, and opportunities to choose courage. Each choice she made, each step she took, would continue to shape her life and the lives of those around her. As the night deepened, she whispered a quiet promise to herself to carry forward the lessons of courage, calmness, and dignity she had learned, to face future challenges with clarity, and to inspire others by the strength of her choices. Even pinned beneath the boulder, even injured and in pain, she had discovered the power within herself, a power that would guide her through the rest of her journey, through the canyon and beyond. And so, under the vast, star-filled sky, the young Apache girl rested, her spirit unbroken, her courage unwavering, and her heart full of the quiet strength that comes from meeting fear with calmness and dignity.